What if the proof of your wife's ultimate betrayal wasn't a text message or a lipstick stain, but the healthy, beating heart of her unborn child? This is the story of how a single medical appointment exposed a lie so devastating it would take a billionaire's ruthless genius to engineer the perfect revenge. Before we dive into one of the most shocking stories of betrayal I've ever come across, I need to ask you a question. Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong, but you couldn't prove it? That feeling is at the heart of today's tale. If you're ready for a story about justice served ice cold, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because this is one you won't want to miss. The blueprint of my life was drawn in straight lines, measured with precision, and built on a foundation of hard work. For 20 years, I'd poured every ounce of myself into my company, turning a one-man operation with a borrowed truck into a regional construction empire. We didn't just build houses, we crafted landmarks. Our name, Stonehaven Construction, was synonymous with integrity and quality. I was the man who built things to last. My home life was supposed to be my masterpiece. My wife Clara was elegance personified. We met in our mid-20s, a whirlwind romance that felt like finding the missing piece of a complex design. She was beautiful, poised, and from a well-known family in our small city of Northwood, a name that carried history, if not much current fortune. For 15 years, we played our parts perfectly. I was the self-made titan, she was the gracious society wife, hosting charity galas and managing our sprawling estate on Crestwood Hill. We had a son, Leo, 14 years old, with my stubborn determination and his mother's quick mind. He was my shadow on weekends, learning to wield a hammer in our garage workshop, dreaming of one day running the company beside me. The second pregnancy was a miracle we'd stopped hoping for. After Leo was born, we'd suffered through 3 miscarriages. The dream of a bigger family had been carefully packed away, a box of tiny clothes and unspoken grief stored in the attic. When Clara told me the news 6 months ago, I felt the ground shift beneath me in the best way possible. I was elated. But Clara seemed shrouded in a quiet anxiety. She called it hormonal nerves. I called it a feeling I couldn't shake. The changes were subtle at first. The coldness in her touch when I reached for her hand. The way she'd vanish for hours, returning with vague stories about shopping but no bags. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, now never left her person, buzzing with notifications she'd ignore with a tight smile. My best friend and business partner Tom saw it too. Over a beer one Friday, his face was grim. I don't want to overstep, man, but Lisa saw Clara at that new bistro downtown. She wasn't alone. Some guy in a suit that cost more than my car. When Lisa waved, Clara looked like she'd seen a ghost. I dismissed it. I built my life on trust. To suspect my wife felt like a betrayal in itself. But sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Evans's office that Tuesday morning, the feeling was a lead weight in my stomach. Dr. Evans had been our family doctor since Leo was born, a kind man in his 60s with a calming presence. He'd been monitoring Clara's pregnancy closely, given her history. She'd been unusually quiet that morning, barely touching her breakfast, checking her reflection in every surface as if preparing for a performance. I'd suggested lunch after the appointment, a celebration. She'd just nodded, her eyes distant. Now, as I waited for her to emerge from the examination room, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling my lungs, I felt it. That instinct that had warned me of unstable ground on a job site, of a dishonest subcontractor, it was screaming at me now. The life I had built, beam by beam, nail by nail, was about to collapse. Inside the examination room, the air was cold. Clara lay on the table, her shirt pulled up to expose the gentle swell of her stomach. The ultrasound gel was cool against her skin, but it was nothing compared to the ice flooding her veins. She had been dreading this day for weeks. Modern medicine was about to reveal what she had desperately tried to conceal. It had started 8 months ago with a man named Silas Mercer, a real estate developer from the capital, all polished charm and predatory smiles. She'd met him at a charity auction. Where I talked about load-bearing walls and project timelines, Silas spoke of international markets and luxury resorts. He represented everything Clara felt she'd missed by being tied to Northwood, to a man who came home with dirt under his nails. He pursued her with a relentless, flattering intensity. Flowers arrived when I was at work. Poetic texts lit up her hidden phone. He painted a picture of a glittering life far from our small city existence, and Clara, feeling trapped and unappreciated, leaned into the fantasy. The affair was a cliché, a luxury hotel suite 40 minutes away, rented under a corporate alias. Twice a week, she'd tell me she was visiting her sister or running errands. Instead, she was in another man's arms. The pregnancy was an accident, a moment of reckless passion. By the time she realized, it was too late for the discreet solution she'd initially considered. The timeline was the problem, a dangerous 3-week discrepancy. She'd been with Silas just before I'd returned from a 3-week project in Oakville, our last intimate time together before the pregnancy was confirmed. Dr. Evans moved the wand across her belly, his friendly face tightening into a mask of professional concern. His eyebrows knitted together as he studied the monitor she couldn't see. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice a fragile thing. The doctor didn't answer immediately. He was mentally calculating, cross-referencing the baby's size and development with the dates she'd provided months ago. The numbers didn't add up. Not even close. This baby was conceived at least 3 weeks earlier than she had claimed. In his long career, he'd seen this before. The nervous energy, the shifting eyes, the trusting husbands in the waiting room. But never with people he knew so well. Never with a man who had built the very room they were in. He set the wand down and turned to her, his eyes grave. "Clara, we need to discuss the timeline. Based on the baby's development, conception occurred approximately 26 weeks ago, not 23. 3 weeks. The difference between a miracle and a life sentence." Her face lost all color. The world narrowed to the hum of the machine and the kind, horrified face of the doctor. "He needed to speak with her husband," he said softly. "This affects you both, and he deserves to know the truth." As he left to retrieve me, Clara closed her eyes. The performance was over. The curtain was falling. Dr. Evans's hands were unsteady as he led me into his private office. "What I'm about to tell you will be difficult," he began, his voice low. "But you need the truth." He laid it out with clinical precision. The ultrasound measurements, the developmental markers, the conception date, 26 weeks ago. "What does that mean?" I asked, my mind struggling to keep up. "It means the child could not have been conceived during the time frame we initially believed. According to your schedule, you were in Oakville for the Harrison Project during that window." The Oakville Project. 3 weeks of 16-hour days securing the biggest contract in our company's history. I'd called her every night, missing her, dreaming of coming home. The realization didn't dawn, it detonated. A silent, internal explosion that shattered 15 years of shared history. the strange behavior, the secretive phone calls, Tom's worried warning. It all snapped into a horrifying, perfect picture. "Are you certain?" The words were ash in my mouth. "I've triple-checked. There's no doubt." I stood, my legs unsteady. My mind was a whirlwind, but at its eye was a sudden, terrifying calm. I thought of Leo, sitting in history class, excitedly designing the nursery for a sibling who shared none of his blood. "What do I do?" I whispered, not to him, but to the universe. "That's not for me to say," he replied. "But you're a good man. You deserve better than this. Protect yourself, protect your son." As we walked back, the good doctor, overcome by a surge of protective fury, uttered words he'd never spoken to a patient before. "Leave this office now and file for divorce." But I was not a man who made rash decisions. I was an architect, and an architect's first job, when faced with a flawed structure, is not to rage against it. It is to plan its controlled demolition. I entered the examination room. Clara was on the table, tears streaking her makeup, staring at the ceiling. She knew. She had always known. "Show me," I said to Dr. Evans, my voice unnervingly steady. He hesitated, then turned the monitor. There it was, undeniable proof in grainy black and white. A healthy, growing baby with a biological clock that marked me as a cuckold. "Jared, I can explain," Clara began, her voice breaking. "No," I said, the word final and cold. "You can't." I memorized the image on the screen. This was my first piece of evidence. "We're going home," I stated, my tone leaving no room for argument. "We will have a conversation, and then you will tell me everything. Who he is, how long, all of it." The drive home was conducted in a silence so profound it was louder than any scream. Clara wept softly in the passenger seat, but I felt nothing for her tears. My mind was already shifting from the past to the future, from the betrayal to the response. Someone out there thought he could dismantle my life, steal my wife, and plant his seed in my home, all while I paid the bills. He thought he was dealing with a simple, hard-working man. He was wrong. He was dealing with a master builder, and I was about to design his ruin. For the next week, I became a ghost in my own home. I moved with a quiet purpose, my emotions locked away in a deep freeze. I told Tom that Clara was having severe pregnancy complications, which explained my distraction and her seclusion. He, loyal to a fault, shouldered my workload without question. Meanwhile, I began my own construction project, one of destruction. My first call was to a private investigator, a man named Victor, former Special Forces, now specializing in the dark art of infidelity. He was expensive, discreet, and ruthlessly efficient. Within 72 hours, he had everything. Photographs of Clara and Silas Mercer entering and leaving the Grandview Hotel. Timestamps. Receipts paid for from our joint account, the account funded by my labor. The narrative was meticulous, damning, and utterly pathetic. But I needed more than just evidence of the affair. I needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal. Victor dug deeper. He discovered that Silas Mercer was married to a powerful corporate lawyer named Isabel. They had 2 young daughters. He uncovered emails, retrieved from a backup server Clara thought she'd deleted, outlining their plan. Clara would wait until after the birth, then file for divorce claiming irreconcilable differences. She would take a generous settlement, my money, and moved to the capital to be with Silas, who planned to leave his wife. The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't just cheating, she was financing her escape with my assets, planning to take my son away from his father for weekends and holidays to be raised in the shadow of the man who had helped destroy his family. The depth of the deception was a bottomless pit. Every memory from the past 8 months was recontextualized, poisoned. Her smile over dinner was a lie. Her excitement about the baby was a performance. The woman I loved was a fiction. I began securing my assets. My lawyer, an old friend named Peter, asked no questions when I instructed him to implement aggressive asset protection strategies. Trusts were established, corporate structures were altered. The house, the business, Leo's college fund, everything was moved beyond the reach of a divorce settlement. Through it all, Leo was my anchor. His innocent excitement about the baby was a knife to my heart every day, but it also fueled my resolve. He would not be collateral damage in their sordid affair. I would protect him, whatever the cost. Clara, sensing my distance but blinded by her own arrogance, continued the charade. She even had the gall to ask me about paint swatches for the nursery. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger, a skilled manipulator who could lie to my face without a flicker of remorse. It was then I knew mere divorce was not enough. Legal separation would let them off too easy. They would still have each other. They would still have the child. They would believe they had won. I could not allow that. A week after the ultrasound, my plan was formed. It had 3 phases: intelligence, preparation, and finally, annihilation. Silas and Clara had made a fatal error. They had mistaken my integrity for simplicity, my trust for weakness. They were about to learn that a man who builds empires knows exactly how to reduce them to dust. Silas Mercer was a predator, but he was a sloppy one. Victor's investigation revealed that his development company was a house of cards, built on leveraged debt and investor confidence. More importantly, he was cutting corners: environmental regulations, safety codes, tax law. He was arrogant, believing his charm could smooth over any violation. I decided to give him exactly what he wanted: me. I arranged a meeting under the guise of a potential partnership. My company's reputation was stellar. We were the obvious choice for a developer looking to make a mark. He took the bait greedily. We met at the Northwood Club. He arrived in a tailored suit, all slicked back hair and a condescending smile. He saw a rugged contractor, an easy mark he could impress with tales of his big city success. "I've heard great things about Stonehaven," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was soft, a desk jockey's hand. "I'm always looking for ambitious partners," I replied, playing my part. "Tell me about your operations." Over lunch, he bragged. He bragged about creative interpretations of environmental studies. He winked as he talked about greasing the wheels with local inspectors. He was so pleased with his own cleverness, so utterly confident that I was a bumpkin he could dazzle, that he essentially confessed to multiple felonies. My phone, sitting on the table, recorded every word. I arranged to visit his active construction sites. What he thought was a partnership tour was, for me, an evidence-gathering mission. I documented everything: improper waste disposal, shoddy scaffolding, unpermitted structural changes. I took photographs, collected soil samples, and made mental notes of every corner cut. The trap was set. The walls were going up around him, and he was handing me the bricks. Back at home, Clara's anxiety was reaching a fever pitch. She missed her next doctor's appointment, claiming illness. I knew she was scrambling, trying to find a way to explain the unexplainable. Her meetings with Silas grew more frantic, less passionate. She was starting to feel the walls closing in on her too, but she couldn't see who was building them. Victor delivered the final piece. He'd intercepted communications showing Silas had put a deposit in a penthouse in the capital. Clara had been consulting with high-asset divorce lawyers. They had a timeline. They had a plan. They just didn't know their plan was about to intersect with mine. 2 weeks after I had first seen the ultrasound, I initiated Phase 3. On a Monday morning, while Clara slept and Leo got ready for school, I made my calls. First, to the State Environmental Protection Agency. I reported the violations, providing photographs, GPS coordinates, and the recorded conversation of Silas admitting his crimes. Second, to the Internal Revenue Service. I detailed his tax evasion strategies, providing a roadmap for a forensic audit. The third call was the hardest, to Isabel Mercer, Silas's wife. "My name is," I said, my voice steady. "I have information about your husband that you need to see." We met at a quiet cafe near her office. She was an imposing woman, sharp and intelligent. I laid it all out before her, the photos, the hotel receipts, the ultrasound report, and the emails outlining their future plans. She didn't cry, she didn't rage. Her face hardened into a mask of cold, professional fury. As a lawyer, she understood the evidence was irrefutable. I said, "He's been planning to leave you for my wife. They intended to use my money to fund their new life." She looked at the ultrasound image, her eyes lingering on the proof of her husband's ultimate betrayal. "Not if I file first," she said, her voice like steel. We spent an hour coordinating our strategies. She would file for divorce that afternoon, seeking full custody and a freeze on all assets. Her connections would ensure it happened with brutal speed. I returned home at noon. Clara was in the kitchen, pretending everything was normal. "How was your morning?" she asked, her voice too bright. "Productive," I said, setting my briefcase on the counter. "We need to talk." I opened the briefcase and spread Victor's dossier across the kitchen table. The photos, the receipts, the ultrasound printout. The evidence of her double life was laid bare for her to see. Her face went white. "I can explain." "There is no explanation that justifies this," I said, my voice quiet and final. "I know about Silas Mercer. I know about the Grandview Hotel. I know the baby is his. And I know about your plan to divorce me and take my money." The tears started, but they sparked nothing in me but contempt. "I also know," I continued, "that as of this morning, Silas Mercer is facing federal environmental charges, an IRS investigation, and a divorce filing from his wife, who now has all this evidence. His business is finished. His assets are frozen. His reputation is garbage." The color drained from her face completely. "What did you do?" "I protected our family. The man you betrayed us for won't be taking care of you. He'll be lucky to avoid prison." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A text from Silas. "Emergency. Call me. Everything is falling apart." I watched her read it, watched the final flicker of hope die in her eyes. Her escape route had been vaporized. "Pack your things," I said. "You have until Leo gets home to leave. After that, you'll deal with my lawyer." "What about the baby? What about our family?" "This hasn't been a family for a long time," I replied. "You made your choices. Now you live with the consequences." As I walked away, I felt it. Not joy, not triumph. Peace. The first peace I'd felt in months. The demolition was complete. Now I could finally start to rebuild. The collapse was swift and total. By Tuesday, federal agents were raiding Silas's office. Headlines screamed about the scandal. Isabel filed for divorce, her case airtight with the evidence I provided. Silas called Clara a broken man. "Everything's ruined! The feds are here! Isabel knows everything!" "I happened," Clara told him, her voice bitter. He knew. He knew everything." She was left alone in a cheap hotel room, pregnant and penniless, realizing the man she'd chosen was a coward who folded at the first sign of real pressure. The community of Northwood, once her adoring audience, turned its back. Her family was mortified. My friends, like Tom, ensured the truth was known, protecting me and Leo from any whispered speculation. Telling Leo was the hardest thing I've ever done. I sat him down in the garage, surrounded by our half-finished projects. "Is Mom ever coming home?" he asked, his young face already braced for pain. "No, son," I said, putting an arm around him. "But we are going to be okay. We're a good team." He looked at the painted cartoon characters on the nursery wall, now being painted over. I was really excited to be a big brother. I promised him, "You will be, someday, when the time is right. This wasn't your fault. You did nothing wrong." The final blow came when Victor discovered Silas had been embezzling from his own company to fund the affair. The hotel suites, the gifts, it was all paid for with stolen money. The embezzlement evidence guaranteed a prison sentence. He was arrested at his office, led away in handcuffs on the evening news. Clara watched from her hotel room, her hand on her stomach, finally understanding the full cost of her choices. A week after the confrontation, I sat in my office. Silas was in custody, facing a decade in prison. His company was bankrupt. Clara was alone, facing a divorce that would leave her with almost nothing, thanks to the adultery clause she'd forgotten was in our prenuptial agreement. The revenge was complete. It wasn't driven by hatred, but by a demand for justice. They hadn't just broken a vow. They had attempted to architect a new life using the rubble of mine. I had simply ensured their blueprint was fundamentally flawed. 3 months later, winter settled over Northwood, a clean blanket of snow covering the scars of the past. Silas began his 7-year sentence. Isabel moved with her daughters to another state, free of his shadow. Clara gave birth to a daughter she named Eliza. The birth was difficult, and she was left to raise the child alone in a small apartment, working a part-time job, supported by welfare and minimal alimony. The society queen was now a struggling single mother, trapped in the very ordinary life she had so desperately tried to escape. Leo and I, meanwhile, began the slow process of healing. We rebuilt the deck together. We took hiking trips on weekends. We talked, really talked, for the first time. The anger in him was real, but I worked to ensure it didn't poison him. He learned a hard lesson about trust, but also about resilience. The divorce was finalized. My company, its reputation enhanced by the way I'd handled the crisis, flourished. We landed even bigger contracts. Clients wanted to work with the man of integrity. I began to rebuild socially, too. I met a woman named Eleanor, a widow who had moved to town. She was kind, smart, and understood the value of what had been broken. We took it slowly. Leo approved, appreciating that she wasn't trying to replace his mother, but to add something new to our lives. Clara, to her credit, began her own painful redemption. The hardship stripped away her entitlement. She worked hard, cared for her daughter, and went to counseling. We saw each other around town, interactions that were polite but distant. The hatred had faded into a quiet pity on my part, and a deep, abiding regret on hers. Leo asked to meet his half-sister. After careful thought, I arranged supervised visits. He was curious but guarded, protective of the life we had built without her. 2 years later, the story had settled into Northwood's history, a cautionary tale about consequences. Silas remained in prison. Clara was managing a local boutique, a modest life, but an honest one. Little Eliza was a happy toddler. Leo was 16, strong and kind, a young man I was immensely proud of. My relationship with Eleanor had grown into a deep, trusting partnership. We were a family, built carefully on a foundation of truth. One summer evening, we hosted a barbecue on the deck Leo and I had rebuilt. Tom and his family were there, along with Peter, my lawyer, and a few other friends who had stood by me. It was a celebration of survival, of new beginnings. Eleanor found me watching the sunset. "Any regrets?" she asked. I looked over at Leo, teaching Tom's youngest how to swing a bat, just as I had taught him. About trusting initially? No, I said. About how I handled the truth when I found it? No. The only thing I regret is that it took a catastrophe to show me the difference between the life I thought I had and the life I was actually meant to build. But maybe that wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was an education. The betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but in the end, it saved me. It freed me from a life of quiet lies and showed me the unshakable strength of the bonds that were real. Justice hadn't been about revenge. It had been about restoration, about insisting that actions have consequences and that truth, no matter how painful, is the only foundation strong enough to build a future upon. The ultrasound that revealed the lie had ultimately given us all the truth, and that truth, however painful it was to uncover, had set us free. And that's the story of how a single moment of truth can change everything. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What would you do if you found out your entire life was built on a lie? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believed that justice was served here, share this story with someone who needs a reminder that integrity always wins in the end. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love, betrayal, and the unexpected twists of fate. I'll see you in the next video.